Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Heart and Hustle podcast. Happy Friday. Wishing everybody a blessed day, as it is a Friday in which we are recording today. I have an amazing guest, someone who I was very excited from the moment he told me he was up for recording an episode, sharing his story, giving some insight into who he is and what he does. Um, and so today's guest is a powerful example of what it means to turn struggle into purpose and purpose into movement. Born and raised in Fairfield, California, John Max Trujillo is a first generation college student who never forgot where he came from. From earning 2 associate degrees at Solano College, transferring to the state of Texas to study history and African American studies, and returning home to the Bay to earn his master's in ethnic studies, Max has always been grounded in the stories of resistance, liberation, and education. Now, as a full-time tenure-track professor at Los Medanos College and the lead of Alpha Academy at his alumni Alpha chapter, a transformative program for young men of color, Max continues to pour into the next generation with the same fire and intentionality that helped him rise. His story isn't just about academia, it's about identity, community, culture, and the responsibility we carry to uplift others along the way. This is a conversation about heart, hustle, and legacy. And so, with that introduction, Frat, anything else that you'd like to elaborate, expand, or share before we dive into these hard-hitting
No,
questions?
I'm happy to be here. Excited to meet with you and share a little bit more about myself. Yeah.
Yeah, no, excited too, man. Trust me, I've been counting down the days for us to get to this day today and create a space in which you get a chance to just share so much of amazing insight, not just about who you are, but also about what you do and why it's so important to
hmm
you and how all of those pieces are interconnected. So to start, as I normally do, I would love for you to give us a chance to learn a little bit more about you, your upbringing. And so let's rewind to Fairfield. What did your childhood sound, feel, and look like? Maybe you can help paint a picture for us.
Yeah. I think thinking back to my early childhood, um, it's actually always nice to come back here to the Bay Area, specifically San Pablo. Both my mom and dad grew up in and around the area, family from this area, and my parents moved to Fairfield um, a little bit after my sister was born. They
Mm,
always said they wanted to move somewhere else, as my mom would always say, so we didn't grow up like on the wrong side of 23rd Street.
yep.
And I think especially for my childhood, my mom, my dad, my sister, I don't feel like I ever felt like we didn't have what we needed.
Hmm.
Um, and looking back now, reflecting on that, my early childhood and just my upbringing until I went to Texas, um, my mother especially always provided everything that, we needed.
Hmm.
I never felt again that we wanted anything. I think looking back, I could see the differences in some of the friend groups that I had
Hmm.
compared to what we kind of had, my sister and I. But again, I think my mother, really never had us wanting for anything.
Hmm.
And my older sister, kind of stepped in when my parents split up, um, to kind of serve as that other role model. And I always argue that they both helped, raise me,
Hmm. Hmm.
my sister and my mother. And so had a good childhood, you know, played sports, various sports, maybe not as good at some of them, but I think one thing that my mother really helped me with in my childhood was getting me in karate.
Hmm.
So I started doing Kaji Kempo karate, which is an indigenous art form, specifically from Hawaii. Kanaka Maoli started this art form back in World War II, prior to bringing that art form here to the West Coast. So it's
Hmm.
karate, um, judo and jujitsu, kempo, and Chinese boxing for Kaji Kempo. Um, Started that since I was 8 years old, and continued to train in it throughout um, middle school, high school, college. not so much in graduate school, but it's a really big part of my life and a part of my childhood and upbringing, is martial arts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What kind of comes up to mind for me, and I don't want to make an assumption so you can
Mm-hmm.
provide clarity, but you mentioned that of your parents separating,
Mm-hmm.
which I'd imagine had an impact potentially of how often maybe you saw your father
Yeah.
or didn't see your dad.
Yeah.
As a, it's something you and I definitely relate with a lot,
Mm-hmm.
having grown up being raised by women. In my case, my
Mm-hmm.
mother and my grandmother, and you and your older sister.
Mm-hmm.
But as I then connected to your experience with karate, would you say that's where you had some good male mentors, role models?
Yeah, definitely. I think, looking back, one of my first instructors was a gentleman named Lucas Sullivan, who I still in contact with,
Mm.
to this day, and kind of served as that male role model that I needed
Mm-hmm.
and didn't necessarily know at the time, right? I was about
Mm-hmm.
12, 13 years old, didn't really,
Connect
put
the
two and two
dots.
together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Lucas Sullivan, Chris Eugenio, Laura Eugenio, uh,
Mm.
uh, husband and wife duo that were really instrumental in my life. But also two role models were, I called them my uncles, not my by blood, but Bobby Soronio Jr. and Sean Villacarlos were definitely instrumental in, raising me and, taking in this shy young man
Mm-hmm.
at the time and helping me grow, right? And one thing that my uncle Bobby will always tell us, and I think about it even to this day in the work that I do, is not only being a champion like inside of the ring, but also outside of the ring as
Mm-hmm.
well. So taking those aspects that we learned about self-discipline inside the dojo, right, to take that with us inside the classroom or wherever we may be in those spaces that we engage in. And so, yeah, being able to reflect back years, right, that was not dating myself, right, but that was 20 years
Mm-hmm.
or so
No,
ago,
yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm. Time flies,
being able
man.
to think about that and understanding, why my mother never let me quit, because at
Mm-hmm.
times I did, right? Wanted to just hang out with friends
Mm-hmm.
or not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily do those extracurricular activities. But looking back, I think that discipline really helped me, especially when it comes to my education as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, definitely those gentlemen that I named, from Lucas Sullivan, Chris Eugenio, Lori Eugenio, husband and wife, Sean Villacarlos, and Bobby Soronio Jr. And also my Sifu Shannon Apple, who's no longer with us,
Mm.
really helped kind of guide me through those transformative years, right? From about 13 to I was, to this day and age,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So a big influence in my life, definitely.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate and think it's very beautiful and powerful that you can still name these individuals who,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, you first got a chance to meet 20 something years ago,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And just the level of impact that they had, not only at that moment in time when they met little Max,
Mm-hmm.
but how they continue to like contribute so much to who you continue to be and
Right.
how you navigate different spaces, whether it's in your personal world or whether it's in your educational
Mm-hmm.
field.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's amazing. I'm going to share with you a quick little story.
Yeah.
My mom had actually put me in karate too before I dove into all things baseball growing
Mm-hmm.
up. And I ended up quitting
Mm.
shortly after I got like a yellow belt or something, very, very early on. It
Yeah.
might not even been a yellow belt. But what I do remember, which I think emphasizes your point, is this level of confidence and also just, how do I say, of discipline
Yeah.
that you have no choice but to kind of grow and gain in that environment
Right.
with these different individuals who are guiding you
Mm-hmm.
and helping
Mm-hmm.
you make sense of their teachings
Right.
within these martial arts. Um, what else would you say? Just because I think it's very fascinating, and especially having grown up here, the martial arts wasn't something a lot of like our young black and brown men were involved with.
Mm-hmm.
And but what else would you say that you really got from that experience?
Yeah. I just think lifelong friends and family, right? I
Mm,
mentioned, I called them my uncle Bobby Soronio Jr. and Sean Villacarlos. They're not blood related to me,
mm-hmm,
right? But they have been influential in my life. And I think uh, creating that family that maybe I felt was missing,
mm-hmm,
right? Or didn't necessarily know at the time
mm-hmm,
was missing in my life. They really kind of filled that role, right? And I, um, am still close with each of them, and their family members, right? And so I just think really that aspect of family
Mm-hmm.
is really important for me. And Kaja Kempo, is different than other martial arts, being taekwondo or karate or judo, etc. And I think that you know having that cohesiveness, that family, I think was really important to me
Mm-hmm.
during
Mm-hmm.
those times, or kind of what I learned from there. Um, you made me think of something else, but now I'm drawing a blank on it. But if it comes back to me,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah. Please
I'll,
feel
I'll
free
share
to
that.
circle back.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's really dope insight. I'm such a big believer that youth benefit from being involved in
Mm-hmm.
something, right? Something that allows them to be either a part of a team, allows them to do some inner growth, allows them to be coached and pushed,
Right.
right, in a way that's healthy. I've seen these videos on TikTok that I can't help but get emotional when
Mm-hmm.
I see them, of these little boys who are doing some form of martial arts, and they're clearly displaying emotion because maybe they're frustrated or they're
Mm-hmm.
struggling with whatever technique or
Right.
whatever task that they've been asked to complete. But the coaches are like there and be like, no, you got this.
Right.
Like, let that out. Like, let
Right.
out those tears if you need to let them out. But you're not gonna quit
Mm-hmm.
though.
Mm-hmm.
You're not gonna not complete this
Right.
task. And I can't help but just recall the many moments when I then transitioned to baseball and I had coaches who gave me that tough love, but even in the midst of the toughness, like the love was so strong
Yeah.
though, right? That
Yeah.
you knew it was just their desire to contribute to your growth and development within whatever skill set like we were trying to develop at that moment
Right.
in time. And so,
Yeah.
if you don't mind me asking, within this particular style of karate and practice, like was there also like a tough love element involved
Oh
as
yeah,
well?
definitely.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, definitely with that. And you know, I think during those years too, if I would get in trouble, like at
Yeah.
school, right, my mom would always, mention it to my
Mm-hmm.
instructors, right, and
Yeah.
they would have those conversations with me. And again, I think looking back, that discipline that I learned, like in the dojo, like putting that, into the classroom,
Mm-hmm.
especially, I think
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for those early years, in martial arts, in Kaji
Mm-hmm.
Kempo specifically. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I just think it's dope, and we'll transition to another question that I
Yeah.
have. But I just think it's dope to think about how these men in our lives, for you, it was your senseis and maybe the different karate coaches that were there, and for me, it was my baseball coaches. How without us even knowing, like they were giving us their time,
Mm-hmm.
their energy, their
Yeah.
love, in ways that maybe in our young minds it was like, well, this is what this they signed up for
Mm-hmm.
this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now looking back and being like, damn, in many ways, like we're now trying to emulate them in different ways in
Right.
different spaces by now trying to give that same love, nurture, care, and maybe tough love to the young people that we support
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
our lives. And so shout out to them, and shout out to any mentor, shout out to any coach. Believe me, like I know it's not easy, and y'all probably don't get paid anywhere near as much as y'all deserve, but you're making a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd imagine a lot of
Right.
us, that's why we do this,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why we give back, hoping that we can make a positive impact on someone's life, that 20 years from now they can still recall that
Right.
impact. And
Right.
so, yeah, I appreciate you giving that insight. Something I wanted to circle back on in regards to your upbringing, Frat, with whatever you feel comfortable sharing, was just that of your parents separating. And I want to provide this context. As you know, and as many of you all know, probably if you follow me, I'm raising my girls in a co-parenting,
Mm-hmm.
right, approach, fashion, and it's tough. It's tough, as even though I'm a very active father, very involved, like it's tough on my end. And right now, my girls are super small. They're 3 years old, about to turn 4, and so their level of consciousness and awareness is still developing.
Right.
But there's gonna be a day where they're gonna get to an age where they're gonna ask me, Dad, like, what happened? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why didn't you and mom work? And we'll have that difficult
Yeah.
conversation. But what, if anything, was helpful for you as you navigated that transition of your parents separating?
Yeah, I think just kind of people again stepping up in my life,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be family members, immediate family members, right, and or like my instructors at the time, right. And I think at the time, uh, to be honest, just kind of staying focused on what was going on at hand.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I kind of blurred out what was going
Mm-hmm.
on, right,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of continued on with the world or what
Yeah.
my life at the time. And so, but I definitely think, having some of my immediate family members stepping up, like my godparents, for example, my older cousins as well. Um, and again, my sister and my mother, just again being there to support
Yeah.
me in things that I may have needed
Yeah.
at those times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there ever a conversation that your mom had with you in which you communicated that things might be a little different, look a little different?
No, not necessarily. I think that we just kind of knew,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That, I was a little bit older, so I think we just kind of knew that um, things would look
Mm-hmm.
different, right? And that's all I ever knew,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, growing up and continuing on even until this day, right? Like it's always been the three of us.
Yeah.
And so we didn't really, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like what's known doesn't need to be discussed, I
Yeah.
guess, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of just went on about our lives,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'm putting you a bit on the spot. I want to give you this like scenario that maybe you can give some really great insight as someone who had to experience it. Again, you don't have to give in detail like how involved your father was in your life afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you came across some young people who are young parents, and for whatever reason, like their relationship didn't work out. What advice would you give to a young man who is a father in navigating how to be involved in their child's life? And I know that in this particular case, like you can't maybe speak on it from the lens of a father, as that's something that I know maybe
Right.
at some point you'll be able to do. But as someone that had to grow
Yeah.
up, right? What would you say is important for them to never forget as they brought this child into this world?
Yeah, I think communication is key, right? From both the father and the child aspect relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but also with the mother,
Yeah.
right? And if I were to give any advice, and I can't speak on this specifically from a father standpoint. I'm a dog dad.
There you
But,
go. Yeah,
I'm a
that's still that.
I'm a dog dad, but 2 dogs at home. But yeah, I think just keeping open that line of communication, letting, and I'm sure do with the twins and the girls. May not understand it as much right now, but knowing that you love them and that you care for them. And although, I will say that my father, wasn't in a good portion of my life, from other family members, I know that he cared and he loved me and my sister as well. Although that physical presence may have not been there. But I think if you can have that physical presence, then you need to continue that, right?
Yeah.
And especially, I think, looking at the standpoint of the twins, for example, or any, young parents, if your children are young, I think understanding that, right? And still kind of, knowing that you have to continue to raise this child, even beyond the time that they're 18, right? I think that a parent's role never really ends.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I could give any advice, that's what it would be, is that communication aspect is key, letting the children know that you care for them and support them, and also just communicating with the partner, whatever relationship that might be, right? Sometimes it may not be the best, but, just communicating, right? I think is going to be crucial for that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think much like yourself, my mom and my dad, they did not have any type of relationship after I was born. And my dad was inconsistently in the picture. And so that very much fueled my desire that regardless of how things would play out, that I would be an active parent in my children's life, right? Mind you, even as a kid, I would like think about myself being a parent one day. And I think it's because of missing a parent and wanting to make sure that I never made a child of mine feel like the way I may have felt at different kind of portions or stages of my life. But I agree that communication is so important. Also having worked with in K through 12 and having, come across different young children or kids, teens whose parents were separated. Like it always broke my heart when, these young people would share with me that they hadn't heard from their dad like in months. You know what I mean? And you could hear like the pain and the sadness in their voice, right? And like you said, although now there's like a separation between the mother and the father, like never forget that like your child had nothing to do with that, right? And they still are worthy and deserve to have you actively in their life. Like you said, and I loved how you said it, if nothing else, to always reassure them that they are loved, because that's such an important like feeling, and just belief that a child like benefits from having. Like, I'm loved in this world. Like you said, I might not have everything I want. I might not, my parents might not be able to afford to take me on all these fancy trips, but I'm loved. And there's something so powerful about that, especially as a child. Yeah.
No doubt.
If you don't mind me transitioning and kind of flipping a little bit, how was it like with your mom? Like, again, you said what is known like doesn't need to be spoken about, but again, it was known that she probably had to carry so much more of the work of raising you. And what was like your understanding of that, or your appreciation of that in the moment, or did it take you time to really like connect all the dots?
I think it took me time to really connect the dots, and having conversations with my mom now, and realizing that she was growing, and learning during those years. And so like what she did was what she thought was best for us. And so I think understanding that, having that realization later on, took some time, but I mean, shit, I wouldn't be here without her, right? Literally, physically wouldn't be here without her, and mentally, emotionally, socially, right? Definitely.
Yeah. This one's a bit of a vulnerable kind of question, and so please, like, feel free to be like, "Yo, frat, let's go to the next one." That's fine. I know my mom as right. We're both so much older. I'm so much more conscious, so much more understanding of just life, as you know, we all just inevitably become. She's gone as far as like at times displaying some vulnerability and just saying like, I'm sorry if I like didn't give you the life that you wanted, or I'm sorry that I wasn't able to find you like a father, or have a father for you that was present. Hello, okay, if your mom's never said anything like that, but has that ever like been something that she's directly or indirectly mentioned or shared?
I think it's interesting. Me and my mom would actually butt heads a lot. And I think it's because we're really alike. And so actually when I transferred to Texas, it was kind of a nice break from each other almost, right?
No, fair.
But it's funny because looking now, like my mom's like one of like my best friends now. And so never really had that conversation, right? But I think just sharing with you, and she shared that with me, right? What I mentioned earlier is that, she did what she thought was best for us, and she was growing at the time, right? And so I think that's, now I couldn't probably draw that correlation when I was 13, 16 years old. But now, in this day and age, having a little bit more knowledge and wisdom,
life experience,
I think I can definitely, draw that correlation between the two.
I think it allows us to just be so much more compassionate, understanding of our parents. I'll share with you very quickly before I transition to this next question. There was this TikTok video, right? I tried to learn a lot and observe the world through TikTok because we get access to so many people, right? And there was this girl that was created a video and was being vulnerable, but sharing how she wished her parents knew how to apologize. She's like, why don't y'all know how to apologize, mom, dad? Like, it was as if she was like venting to an audience, obviously, but specifically talking to her parents, just wishing they knew how to apologize, right? And I took it upon myself, and I was very gentle and kind of like took an educator's perspective in what I shared, which was that our parents sometimes like model what they experience.
Right.
So if they never got an apology from their parents, like they might not know how to do that. They might not even know that's okay to do, right? And what I just shared is that, although easier said than done, I would encourage her to maybe like meet in a neutral space with her parents. Actually, like ask them about their upbringing. Like, what were your parents like? Because I shared how it would probably give you a lot of insight.
Right.
Doesn't justify, doesn't excuse that your parents don't know how to apologize or don't apologize when they're wrong. But I'm always big on like, how do we at least make sense of what is happening?
Yeah. It's definitely a generational thing, right? Something that I talk to my students about in some of my classes, which I think with our generation and the younger generations younger than us are going to kind of like flip that, right? So we can actually have these conversations with our children or our nieces and nephews, etc., to be able to express those feelings, right? Because if you don't, then you end up having children that don't know how to do that. And that affects relationships, jobs, etc., right? And so, yeah, it's definitely generational.
Yeah, and I appreciate you emphasizing and acknowledging that real component, because as you said, from the moment you said generational, my mind went into the space of like, that's so true, because I can't even imagine myself ever asking my mom to apologize to me, because my generation, like, we didn't expect that, right? But I do love, though, that, like you said, the younger generation is trying to advocate for more of those healthy interactions, because I think for me, when I think about an apology, what it really comes down to is like accountability, you know what I mean, and just taking ownership of whatever harm was caused, whereas I think the older generation view apology as like, oh, it must mean I'm wrong, right? Like, it's more tied to that. And I think there's this desire to not be wrong, right? Especially because that's, as a parent, you know, I remember I've seen it in movies. My mom used to tell me, but for as long as you live under my roof, you live under my rules, right? And it's like, well, what if these rules are not like healthy or conducive to me being a great person, right? So, yes, generationally, things definitely evolve and change, and there's a beauty in that. And I think you and I belong to this generation that is like in the middle of kind of like both, and trying to make sense and connect the dots for all parties.
We're part of the old school and also the new school that's trying to like bridge some gap between there, right? Understanding that you don't talk back, right? But then also realizing, but what if we have to question what's being done? So
or advocate on our behalf.
So that's it's like we're caught in the mix. So to speak.
It's fascinating for sure. Very curious to see what it's going to be like for my twin daughters. I'm trying to see like how I can integrate a combination of like these different teachings, and even allowing my mom to like do some of the teaching, right? And trying to figure out, right, which of what she's providing like is valuable, and which might I have to redirect, which is its own kind of like little dance to also do with my mom, who's a new grandma, and trying to also learn what that is like. But I appreciate you for being willing to touch on something that you may have not even expected to come up. But thank you. Like, I do appreciate it. And just to kind of give you insight as to why I wanted to ask you those questions is because the unfortunate reality is, at least where I grew up, like there were just a lot of young people without stable households. And I think stories like ours, who grew up in some of those type of households and yet still found a way to overcome, are so important to give some level of hope of someone who is right now navigating something, a moment, either as the child, as the teen, or even as the parent, right? Whoever is watching and thinking to themselves, like, damn, how do I properly help raise my child if their parent, the other parent isn't as involved, right? So I appreciate just you being willing to dive in that way. Last thing in regards to kind of like your upbringing, Fred, I want to ask you, was there a moment, maybe not even academic, but just a moment where you first realized that you had something powerful to offer this world?
Yeah, I think from the time I was about 8 years old, my mom always told me that I should become a teacher.
Okay.
And so I vividly remember that, and would tell me that throughout my early years, and even in high school. And I remember talking to a high school teacher of mine, an English teacher, and he had said something similar to me. And I look back, and if I ever run into him, I'll apologize, because I basically told him that, I couldn't be a teacher in California because you don't make any money, which is a whole nother topic of discussion about teacher salary, et cetera, throughout the nation, regardless of here in California. But I mean, look at what I do now, right? I'm a full-time faculty member at a community college, right? Our community college system in the state of California is the largest educational institution in the United States, right? I was reading something the other day, and I think 1 in 5 students attend a community college, and they're from the state of California, right? And so, looking back on that, I don't know. It was something that my mom said to me. So I don't necessarily know, she saw something. Obviously, that teacher saw something. That was my senior year of high school. And yeah, now look at me. So
yeah. But to be fair, I do feel like we definitely hear that messaging of working in the educational field. you'll be poor, you'll be broke, you won't make money. And like you said, that's a whole different conversation. Right. And they're not that that's like not true to some extent. But I do think that there are opportunities that exist out there that allow you to live to some extent comfortably, right? While still being able to do what you were meant to do.
Yeah. And I think I always tell my students, regardless of what field they're going to go into, that eventually they'll more than likely have a partner, right? And so then be able to navigate those spaces of being able to support one another and live comfortably, right? Like, yes, your salary may not be the best right now, but as you continue to grow, the longevity of you being in those positions, et cetera, it's going to rise.
Yeah.
But having that partner too can kind of help offset some of those challenges that might be coming up. So yeah, again, maybe that's another podcast for another day.
Yeah, no, for
right?
Sure. Trust me.
Because it's crazy. It's absolutely chaotic that our K through 12 educators throughout the entire United States are working multiple jobs, sometimes 2 to 3, right? And the fact that K through 12 educators, their job doesn't stop when the bell rings at 3 o'clock, right? They're there till 6, prepping, etc. And we don't get paid for that time, right? And so that's another conversation for another time. But again, just thinking about that, I hope with this new generation that's coming up that is advocating even more than us and our elders, that'll change.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're raising the next generation. They're raising the next generation.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, why are these people not getting?
Man, yeah. So, I've never understood the devaluing financially of educators. It's such a tough job. You're talking about at times there being one adult with like 25 to 30, like young people with different personalities. Some ate at home, some didn't. Some are dealing with different mental challenges, issues. So much in one space, and you're asking them to focus on this concept right here, that in that moment in time, that kid might be like, this has nothing to do with what's important in life with me, right? And like having the skill, the passion, and the commitment to do that Monday through Friday.
Right.
You know, like it's wild. It couldn't be me. I'm just going to be honest. Like that couldn't be me. I love kids. I love teens. I love young adults. And I have definitely found different ways to directly work with them, but in a classroom setting as a teacher, even I'll be the first to admit, like, I don't know if I got that patience in me. So shout out to every teacher out there who's doing this work, not because of that paycheck, but because of the love, the commitment, or whatever it is that's pushing you to be able to get out of bed every day and show up for those kids. Because even if they don't tell you themselves, believe me, like you make such a difference. And, I'm sure you and I can be like testimonies with our stories of the difference that is made by these educators. And so, I appreciate you just kind of like sharing your thoughts on that. And like you said, maybe that's another episode for another day, because it's clearly something that needs to continue to be talked about. But switching gears a little bit, Frat, I wanted to ask you now more so about your journey in education, right? We talked a little bit and you gave us some insight as to like what Fairfield growing up, your household dynamics, what they look like, the extracurriculars that you were a part of that really helped shape you. But now focusing a bit more within like the educational experience, what was that for you? Like, let's start with K through 12. Like, was that something where you were really good at it naturally? Were there struggles? Like, how would you paint the K through 12 picture?
Oh, I hated it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely hated it. Right. I mean, I think K through 6th grade was good, right? But I think middle school, again, just navigating all that was going on in my life was a lot. But even in high school, I never, I don't think I had the mentors like outside of the classroom. I'm thinking of like my uncles again from karate, but I never had that guidance, right? Or I never saw, teachers specifically that looked like me.
Yeah, that's real.
And, would advocate on my behalf and say, oh yeah, Max, you can become X, Y, or Z. And, I think it was a struggle to get me through high school. I mean, if you were to ask my mom, she would laugh and say she was pulling me by my hair. I had really long hair back then. And, she said she had to pull me by my hair to get me to graduate. Right. And, yeah, definitely had a totally different experience with, higher ed than I did
Mm-hmm.
with K through 12.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Walk me through your senior year of high school. At that point, your mom had dragged you by your hair to
Yeah.
get to that point.
Hmm.
Did you know that going to college was something you wanted to do? Because much like myself, you are also a first generation college
Right.
going student. Shout out to all first gen
Hmm.
college going students and aspiring college going students. But did you know that was going to be a path you were wanting to take, or how did that play out for you?
Yeah, I knew that I was going to go to community college
Mm-hmm.
because my older sister was there at the time when I
Mm,
was in my senior year of high school. And she finished her associate's degrees there at Solano Community College. But that's all I knew,
mm-hmm.
right? Like, I didn't know what I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
study. To be completely honest, I had an uncle and a cousin of mine that worked at the refineries here in,
Chevron.
yep,
Mm-hmm.
no, not at Chevron, at ConocoPhillips in
Mm,
Rodeo.
okay.
And I remember thinking, like, my senior year of high school, I was like, oh, well, I'm just gonna
Go do
apply
that.
to get a job there. They make
Mm-hmm.
crazy money, blah blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's like looking back, and then realizing like the backbreaking work that those individuals do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the toll that it takes not only
Mm-hmm.
on their bodies, but I mean, yeah,
Just their
realistically, their
health in
bodies
general,
and their
yeah.
health, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, no, I didn't know that I was going to go to college right out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, that was a struggle. But having my older sister have kind of navigate that first portion of,
Mm-hmm.
like, she's the one that helped me apply, right? She's the one that helped me fill out financial
Financial
aid
aid.
because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to do that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't even something. And now it's more implemented into our high school
Yeah.
setting, which I'm appreciative of. But back then, and that really was, it's not that long ago, right? I'm
Yeah.
not that
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
And
Same.
so, thinking about that, but if it hadn't been for her, because again, my mother, she attended some community college, but never got a degree, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, um, I think, yeah, if somebody would have asked me, Max, when I was 17, 18 years old, are you going to go to college? I probably would have said no,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? And then I
Mm-hmm.
ended up at Solano Community College.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I definitely can resonate so much for that because I too had no clue what financial aid was
Hmm.
like heading towards the tail end of my high school journey. And if it wasn't for someone literally sitting down with me and walking me through that, my mom didn't know how to do that.
Right.
I didn't have anybody else within my family that I even knew to ask for that type of help. I remember thinking that the idea of going to college was uh, not possible because I was like, well, I'm not going to put the financial burden on my mom. Like,
Hmm.
again, not knowing that financial aid was
Hmm.
a resource.
Right.
And so, yeah, like you said, that wasn't even that long ago,
Right.
right? But it makes me think of the hundreds and thousands of students who didn't know either
Hmm.
and didn't have an older sister
Hmm.
or didn't have like a teacher come in and kind of save me last minute and help guide me through that, who never even got an opportunity
Right.
to see if higher ed could be for them,
Hmm.
right? Which is so unfortunate. And like you said, it is what also makes me thankful that now schools are a bit more intentional with having like a financial night, financial aid workshop
Yeah.
night, right?
Or a financial aid counselor that works.
Financial aid counseling, and
Uh,
sometimes they even like invite community college
yeah.
staff to like
Hmm.
support, and so
Hmm.
that's dope too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
yeah, no, I appreciate that, Fred, and clearly you transitioned to Solano Community College. And when I was in high school and about to graduate, there was this idea of community colleges where it's like you go there to like get stuck forever.
Hmm.
And there was just such a negative narrative around like going that route.
Yeah.
What was that like for you in regards to what you knew about community colleges and how you felt about that being like the next chapter of your life at that point? And then the three-part question is like, and then how was that experience for you?
Yeah. I think, right. Even to this day, there's a narrative around community colleges, right? That you're just going to be around the same people that you went to high school with,
Yes.
etc., right?
Mm-hmm.
But I always tell my students now that I teach, right, at the community college level, I'm like, you all are taking the same exact courses as a peer of yours is at UC Berkeley,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sitting in a class of 36 and they're sitting in a class of
Like
500,
500.
right?
Easy.
And that faculty member doesn't know your name, right? Majority of the time, they're not grading your work, it's a TA, etc., right? And
Mm-hmm.
so when I was at Solano, I think that I'll tell you a story, kind of, because it might help us transition to another question that you might have. It was my second semester at Solano. So my sister helped me pick out my classes too, right? Because I didn't know what I was supposed to
Like how to
take.
do that.
And it was my second semester at Solano, and I, similar attitude to when I was in high school, like kind of didn't really care, right? So I was going to my classes, but I really wasn't doing the work. Like I didn't know that I was actually supposed to be following along with the course syllabus and staying updated on those readings, right? And so I got a letter from financial aid. I think it was, that spring semester. So that literally the second semester of me being in community college, and it basically stated that if I didn't bring my grades up, to at least a C average the following semester, that I could be ineligible for financial aid. And my mom was, completely transparent with me and telling me, like, she didn't make the type of money to help pay for me to go to school, right? So I had three options. I could, one, get my act together, and she said a different word that I won't say, right? Two, I could join the military. I have a large line of family who's served in the military, and or three, I could start working full time. And I know I didn't want to do the latter two, and so I think that was kind of like a spark, right, in my mind that really was like, wow, Max, like you have to get it together, right? If you want to make something of yourself and do better, right, have more opportunities, etc., like you have to take it seriously. And so from that point on, I actually sat in the front of all my classes, regardless of the subject matter that was being taught. Would ask for help, right? Was not afraid to ask the professor or the TA, for help, specifically with math, because math has never been my strong suit. Um, and would go to the math lab, etc. I mean, I would spend hours studying, right? Because I may not be the smartest person in the room, but I can guarantee you that I work harder than anyone in the room, right? Or just as hard as the next person. And so that really lit a spark in me. And, from that point on, from Solano all the way until I finished graduate school, I had a 4.0, right? Despite one semester when I was at UTEP in the summer, but that's besides the point. I got a B in one of my classes, but I just took the initiative, right? Because I understood that, one, I didn't want to be at Solano for too long, right? I was there for 3 years actually before I transferred out. But I ended up getting 2 associate's degrees there, right?
You made
while
the
I
most
was there.
out of that.
So, that's kind of my time, at Solano, was just really focused when I was there.
I think what it makes me think about is you having like a light switch moment. Like at such a high degree, once you kind of found yourself in that predicament where if I don't turn around, like I won't be able to afford to even be coming here, right? Which typically going the community college route is the more affordable route.
Right.
But even then, right, given our circumstances, we might not even be able to afford that without the support of
Right.
financial aid. And so just shout out to you for being able to like take it upon yourself to really step and lean into the experience in its entirety, right? And realizing that you did have so much more power and control over the outcome than maybe you initially were like giving yourself credit for.
Right.
When, like you said, you weren't really trying, like you were just kind of showing up, going through the motion, but it was clear that's not enough.
Right.
Like, I really got to like buy in.
Definitely.
And so you mentioned it already, and so I'm excited to ask. Now I'm framing like this. Texas is a whole different vibe, man, that I've had the chance to experience on a few occasions. And I love the folks that I've had the chance to share space with in Texas. Shout out to y'all. I've had the chance to be in Houston. I had the chance to visit College Station out there, Texas A&M. And folks were just really dope. But how in the world did you end up all the way out in Texas?
So I transferred to the University of Texas at El Paso. I have a cousin of mine, an older cousin, who played football for them.
Okay.
So he had already graduated, and had the opportunity for me to be able to live with him, right?
Okay.
And so kind of get that experience of moving away. And I definitely had a sense of privilege, right? Because I was able to transfer somewhere and actually know people that live there. And so that's what brought me to Texas, to be completely honest. Um, and I also have a grandfather of mine who had lived there at the time. He now moved back to Richmond, but I ended up my latter portion of being there in El Paso, living with my grandfather
Mm-hmm.
down there. And so, um, again, actually not blood related to me. It's my god sister's grandfather. But took me in and learned a lot from him as well during that time. His family
Mm.
has a large history of El Paso and really created an extended family, right, of aunts and uncles, cousins down there in El Paso that I'm still close with to this
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to that karate aspect, being in martial arts has allowed me to meet people from all around the United States.
Right.
And so I actually had a good family friend of mine who runs karate schools down there in El Paso. And so they also, treated me like family and took me in. I
Mm.
had a place to train there while I was down there and to work. And so, um, I think I don't know. It's just interesting. It just kind of brought me down there to El Paso,
Yeah.
but definitely enjoyed my time there at UTEP. From the mentors that I made and met, from the friends that I
Mm-hmm.
met in undergrad, and some that I'm still close with, even
Mm-hmm.
to this day.
Mm-hmm.
El Paso will always have a piece of my heart
Oh
for sure.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it is a different vibe. It was definitely a culture shock.
I was gonna ask.
It was
Mm-hmm.
definitely a culture shock. For those that don't know, El Paso sits along the quote unquote U.S. Mexico
Mm-hmm.
border
Mm-hmm.
that sits right next to the country of Mexico, specifically the city of Ciudad Juarez and
Mm.
the state of New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So only about 25, 30 minutes away is the state of New Mexico. Mexico's right up, the country of Mexico's right across the border, and then you're in West Texas. It's the furthest west that you can get in Texas before you quote unquote go over that border. And I say quote unquote over that border because borders are man-made
Mm-hmm.
structures, whether they
Mm-hmm.
be physical and or within our minds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely a culture shock because the community there, I would argue, is about 85% Mexican American.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't speak Spanish, right? Spanish is
Mm.
not my first language. I wouldn't argue that I speak it at all.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it a lot. And so having people, whether they be at the grocery store, restaurants,
Just
etc.,
assume.
at school, just see me, they see my last name, speak to me in Spanish. And even the students that I worked with, I was able to work with the Boys and Girls Club down there. And that's
Mm.
actually where I got some of my first opportunities to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationships that I built at the Boys and Girls Club of El Paso um, were amazing with the
Yeah.
students and with the families and the community members and the staff that worked there. Really helped shape me while I was down there in El Paso as well. So again, they took me into their Boys and Girls Club of El Paso family as well. And so um, Boys and Girls Club will always have a big piece of my heart
Mm-hmm.
as well as El Paso.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I appreciate you just giving the audience some insight in regards to just where this university sits
Hmm.
in correlation to some few other like
Hmm.
significant places around. Appreciate just you giving your genuine thoughts and perspective on that of borders, which I'm
Hmm.
fully in alignment and agreement with you on. Um, what would you say was like your first memorable moment upon getting to Texas? Like, is there a moment where you're like, yeah, this made me realize I'm far from home?
Um, I think what made me realize that I was far from home was, yeah, not being able to, immediately, if I had a question, like talk to my sister,
Yeah.
like face to face,
Yeah.
or to my mom, right? And I think understanding that and realizing that like helped me grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if anybody has the chance, for anyone that's like listening, that's going to community college or looking to transfer somewhere like that's not even out of state, but just somewhere that's not nearby, I
Yeah.
think if you have the opportunity to do so, and you're willing and capable to do that, it's really a growth that I can't
Agree.
even describe what it
Mm-hmm.
means for you as a
Mm-hmm.
person. but it really helped me, grow as an individual. Um, and I think that was just an aha moment of like, yeah, I am super far away. And just to drive, right? Because we actually drove there.
Oh, okay.
So understanding that, yeah, like I think El Paso is like 1,900 miles away from here. It's quite a drive, but not too much of a fun drive. But yeah, I think that was just an aha moment, like understanding that, yeah, like I am far away.
Yeah.
Um,
Anything culturally in regards to the way like folks dress, the slang that was used, like, or the music that was just the vibe out there. Like, did any of that catch you off guard when you arrived there at Texas?
um, again, I don't speak Spanish, so when I
Yeah.
was hearing some of like the slang terminology, I wouldn't be able to
Mm,
compare it to like here.
yeah. Yeah.
But my friends would always make fun of me. My karate friends that are like family members, they would always make fun of me because I would say
I
hella,
knew it. I knew you were going.
and they're like,
Yeah,
"What
I
the?"
was.
They're like, "What are you talking about?"
You're like, y'all got hell of
Yeah,
this, hell of
yeah, and
that.
they would always make fun of me on that. But man, and anybody can argue with me on the podcast. You can argue with me as well, but you'll lose because um, the best Mexican food in the world sits in the city of El Paso, right
Okay.
along the border. I don't. Yes, I'm from California,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the food in El Paso is next to none, and so
Mm,
all my family members that live out there, my close friends and family members that live out there know um, the best Mexican food is down there. And I just shout out to La Pila. It's down there near the border, near where I
okay.
lived with my grandpa. Little kind of like hole in the wall spot, but the best food ever. Right.
Yeah.
Even
Okay.
when I went back to visit, I had to
Stop
go there
by.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If I'm not mistaken, one of my really good friends, Alvaro, I think he has some family in El Paso,
Hmm.
and he goes out there from time to time, and yeah, he raves about the food.
Oh
So
yeah.
so trust me, like you ain't the only one
Yeah.
who has good reviews
Yeah.
on the Mexican food out there. But no, I appreciate that insight in regards to just what that move meant for you, not only educationally but also personally.
Hmm.
Because I agree wholeheartedly. I went to San Diego State for 9 months, up to a year, and I grew in ways that I would not have
Right.
been able to grow if I had the ability to just go and ask my mom or go
Hmm.
and get food from my grandma. Like,
Right.
you just have to grow and develop a level of independency that, like, it's not even because you want to, you just have to,
Right.
right? Like, in
Hmm.
order to thrive
Hmm.
and being in a different environment. And so I'm just really glad that you had the chance to do that as well. Something I wanted to circle back on, Frat, and you can connect the dots for us, and it's also an opportunity for you to just highlight just your accolades. But you mentioned how when you first went to community college, you had no clue what you wanted to study. You
Yeah.
also shared that you got two associates. I would love for
Hmm.
you to share with the audience, what were your associate's degrees in, and then what did you decide to get your degree in at UTEP?
Yeah, so I got one associate's degree in social sciences,
Okay.
so it's like liberal arts social sciences, and the other was in elementary teacher prep because
Mm.
I thought I wanted to be an elementary school
Mm-hmm.
teacher. And then when I was down in El Paso, I chose to major in history.
Mm.
I've always been a kind of a history buff, um, and I minored in African American studies. And my mentor, who I'm still in touch with, big important role in my life and during my time at UTEP, and even to this day, Dr. Selfa Chu, she actually helped guide me into realizing how important history is, but also that minor of African American studies. She actually introduced me to her mentor, which became my mentor. He was the
Mm.
chair of the African American Studies Department, Dr. Maceo Crenshaw Daly. And he no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed
Mm.
away actually the semester I was graduating.
Mm.
Um, and he became like a mentor to me to help kind of challenge me in my coursework. And he, along with Dr. Chu, along with other my faculty members and professors there at UTEP, um, really helped me get ready for the rigors of graduate school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I remember I took a seminar course with Dr. Daly, and there was only two people in the class. It was me and another student who was African American Studies minor, and um, you know he pushed that coursework on us that we got in graduate school. So when it came to having to read a book in a week, like that's what we did, right? And I was doing that as an undergrad, and having those conversations that you would in a seminar course that you get kind of in graduate school. So, um, yeah, shout out to both Dr. Daly, Dr. Chu. Dr. Chu is still doing great work down there at the University of Texas at El Paso. Um, and yeah, those are my degrees there,
Yeah.
undergrad and well, my associates and my bachelor's degree. Yeah.
Something I want to pick your brain about, because I think it's really important, especially in 2025, and with some of the people in power who are trying to make pursuing higher education even that much more difficult. There's this trend, so I'm connecting a few thoughts and ideas. There's this trend on TikTok, and I mentioned TikTok a lot, but it's folks talking about why either young black men are not going to college or young Latino men aren't going to college, and there's all these comments and thoughts as to what's kind of going on. But instead of focusing as to why they're not going to college, I would love if you could give some advice, some insight as to what the power was for you to go to college, and maybe what advice you would give to young men who are in that kind of chapter in life where they're making the decision: do I want to do that? Is it worth it? Like, will it be for me? What would you say?
Yeah, I think that you have to take that leap, and you have to try at least to determine whether or not you think that's going to be a good fit for you. And I'm speaking specifically like for the college aspect because, to be completely honest, college isn't for everyone, right? And that's absolutely okay, right? I, highly applaud those that are looking to possibly go into the trade schools, right? Because we need those individuals who know how to do that work, right? I don't know how to build a house, right? I don't know how to lay concrete, etc. Right? I'm not an electrician, a welder, etc. So shout out to all of those, men and women, those folks that go out to the trade schools and even into the military as well. But I think I want to flip the question, because I think, and I'm putting on my faculty hat here. I think yes, we have seen a decline in enrollment for communities of color, and especially for young Black and Brown men, right? And so I think, putting on my faculty hat here, I think that we as faculty members need to kind of like step back, and make sure that those students know that we actually care, right? I'm taking a class right now, an online section, just for my own professional development, and it was actually a student from my former college at Solano Community College. I was basically just sharing that he had missed a couple assignments and the faculty member had reached out to check in. And sometimes we don't do that, right? Because we might be teaching multiple courses and we have 35 plus students in each class, etc. But I think letting those students know that you care and about their well-being, about what's going on in their life, that can totally just flip their own, trajectory or their own mindset about the importance of, like, yes, I can do this because I have folks around me who do care about me being successful, right? And also just shout out to any of those learning communities that folks can be a part of, whether it be Puente, whether it be Emoja, right, whether it be Mesa, etc. That any of those learning communities that they can get a part of, I think that those are crucial, right?
Agree.
So I put it from the standpoint of being a faculty member, but also from the standpoint of being a young man of color, progressing through those different spaces years ago. Also not being afraid to ask for help.
Yeah,
I think that's a stigma that, as men, we may not want to ask for help. And I know even to this day, sometimes I struggle with wanting to ask for help, whether it be in my line of work or outside of work, etc. But knowing that it's okay, because, we were all, some of us first generation students at once asking these questions. And so willing to, step out of that box to try new things. But also the faculty standpoint as well, and also to our classified staff that at all of our colleges, they're continuing that engine of running these colleges. So all the work that they do and the crucial work that they do to help our students.
Yeah. And I think something you said a little earlier that I want to just bring back, Frat, that is so important is that of representation. And I think it is so important, especially, right, with there being these attacks on like DEI, to have folks that come from similar communities, who have walked similar paths in life, right, that are able to tell these students, not only do I care, but I also want to acknowledge and validate like the challenges or the fears or the insecurities. In my last episode with my LB Nimi, we were talking about students being afraid to apply to internships, right, within the program that I work for because they might not feel like they're good enough. And we dove into the concept of like imposter syndrome, right, and that being such a real thing that all of us, even professionally, navigate from time to time. As successful, as confident as we may be within who we are and our skill sets, when you exist within systems that historically were not intended for us to exist in, right, there's also like that kind of internal battle, like. And then on top of it, if you go to a university that doesn't reflect you either, like student wise, right? So I'll give you an example. When I went to San Diego State, and I say this carefully but also candidly, that was the most amount of white people I had ever been around, right? And there was a part of me that was like, did I make the right decision? Because this is so different than what my experience was at East Bay, where it was like folks from Oakland, Hayward, Richmond, like it was the community, right? We're having basically like a block party every other weekend, you know, because there was so much like commonality and understanding of what it even meant for us to be in college and like celebrating that as much as we could. But then when you go to a space where you don't see people that look like you don't have staff members that come from your background, that's like a whole other challenge that you're then having to navigate. I think what I would love, if you have the opportunity to share a little bit on behalf of, though, from your identity as a former student, what were the stuff outside of the classroom, though, that our young people might not be aware of? Also, just make the college experience. What is that college experience?
Yeah, I think being involved in the student clubs, right? UTEP has a large percentage of the students that live in and around the area, so it's kind of a commuter school. So sometimes students, will just go to class and then they go home, and then so they're not really necessarily involved. They're just, there to get their degree, which I, was as well, especially being from out of state. Like I was like, I'm here to get my degree, etc. But I think that's so important, right? To be able to get involved in the student clubs. And a lot of these colleges allow students, if you're interested in opening up a new club that's not even there, I think the majority of the time the paperwork is you only have to have like 3 other
members,
full-time, students who have like a certain minimum GPA, etc., to start whatever club that may be. And so I think just getting involved with student organizations, student clubs, if it's student government, that's something that you're interested in, would be important.
Yeah. And I love that you shared the benefits of joining clubs and organizations, because that's also how you build social capital. It's how you network. And I'm just be honest, like after you do like the professional meetings, there's typically a kickback afterwards or a hangout, or you get a chance to go eat, and you also just get a chance to connect on a human level, right? Outside of just the identity of a student. And, for young people who are at that crossroads of trying to figure out if college is for them, like my frat Max said, we're at a time where I think as both of us being educators, we fully acknowledge that college is not for everyone or doesn't need to be for everyone. There's so many different paths that are also powerful, also lucrative, and also needed, right, as society. And what I would never want, though, is for a young man, to be more specific, to not go because they don't think they belong. Right. Because I think that's a different kind of experience that unfortunately I have seen firsthand be the reason why some individuals didn't even see or try. Right. Because they just had already made the decision. It's not for me. I'm not meant to be there. I'm not good enough. And I'd go as far as saying is like every, person in this world deserves an opportunity to experience it if they're wanting to. Right. Or if they're curious, even if you're just curious. I always tell my student, worst case scenario, you find out it's not for you, but at least now you can say you tried, right? You don't have to then 20 years from now wonder, what would life have been had I gone to school? Because I've also been in those classes as an undergrad, as a grad student, with classmates who are like 40 years older than me, right? Trying to get their bachelor's. And I've always been so curious, and thankfully some of them were open to sharing and being like, well, yeah, when I was young, I had kids as a teen. My generation, we did that. So I didn't get a chance to go to school, but it was always my dream to go to school. And I think it's also a reminder, though, that like education is always going to be available if like you want it. And I just think education, like beyond the degrees, allows you to like learn about things that you just wouldn't have otherwise. Whether it's through the GEs, whether it's through your major, which I kind of want to now transition to, because on top of you getting your bachelor's degree, which that in itself is a dope ass accomplishment, you then pursued grad school. And if you could maybe give us a little insight as to the school you went to and what you pursued? Because I know that it aligns very well with what you do now.
Yeah. So I thought that I was going to stay in Texas
Okay.
for graduate school. And when I started to look at different programs, talking to Dr. Chu at the time and Dr. Daly as well, before he passed, deciding where I wanted to go, I kind of started to realize as, I was getting ready to graduate that I wanted to come back home.
Mm.
So I was actually then only looking at schools that was here in the state of California. So I was looking at like UCLA. I had applied to Berkeley, um, and I had applied to SF State, and I ended up getting into SF State, and I got my master's degree in ethnic studies. Shout out
Mm-hmm.
to SF State. It is the first
Mm-hmm.
college of ethnic studies in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Um, Cal State LA shortly, followed, or no, I shouldn't say shortly. It was years later, but I went to SF State and got my master's degree in ethnic studies, and my research there really focused on this notion of third worldism. This
Mm.
notion of third worldism isn't something new that scholars have written about. Scholars have been writing about it since the early 1920s. And I specifically looked at the Black Panther Party, particularly here in Oakland, and the Brown Berets, specifically in East LA. The Brown Berets had multiple chapters throughout the Southwest. And as you all know, the Black Panther Party had multiple chapters in and around the US and
Mm-hmm.
even in Algiers as well. And what I looked at between both of those organizations was this notion of third worldism, and I argued in my research that this notion of third worldism is an understanding really among communities of color that our struggles are inherently interrelated, right?
Mm-hmm.
On a multitude of levels. I added a little bit onto that specific definition for my thesis, right? But I really drew from my own chair's work, Dr. Jason Ferreira, when he wrote about these similar concepts of third worldism, particularly along the Third World Liberation Front strike at SF State, right, which demanded this opening of a College of Ethnic Studies. And so, um, you know, years later, after I did that research and understanding the world
Mm-hmm.
as we know it right now, right, realizing like, wow, this is happening as we're speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
These notions that, again, communities of color throughout our world are connected via both oppression, via struggles, triumphs, etc., on a multitude of levels, right? But having that understanding is crucial, right?
Yeah.
In knowing that our struggles are not just a monolith. It's not just here. It's happening
Mm-hmm.
all around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and the Black Panthers really showcase that. Um, not only in the works that I looked at, because I looked at specifically their newspapers. So the Black Panther, and I looked at La Casa or the Cause from the Brown Berets newspaper. So that's what I looked at um, because I was trained in the state of Texas as a historian to look at microfilm, and so that's kind of what I knew, and so that's kind
Mm.
of what I went off of. Um, but yeah, that's what my research was, and again, graduate school is a whole nother ballgame.
It
But
is. Mm-hmm.
I'm blessed to have went to that program, met the colleagues and peers and family that I'm still close with to this day that I
Mm-hmm.
graduated with, and um, my mentors who taught me there that I'm still close with, and really helped me get into where my space that I'm in now, professionally. So yeah.
Yeah, you've had one inspiring educational journey, Frat, and I just appreciate just the level of detail that you went into in regards to your area of focus for your thesis,
Hmm.
um, and how I'd imagine you learned so much of how our past can reflect our present and
Hmm.
can contribute to our future if we don't educate ourselves on these movements,
Right.
and what their intentions were,
Hmm.
and how we still need some of
Hmm.
those community efforts
Right.
and ability to understand how interconnected, right, our communities,
Right.
especially the Black and Brown communities, are historically, currently, in an effort to work more in unison, right? Which then leads me to want to transition, because we are going to close out in a little bit, as I want to be mindful of your time and just also making sure that we can circle back on a second episode and dive into things without it feeling so rushed. But I want to transition into than that of you, like myself, being a non-black member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to share just like what your journey was into this organization that has so much alignment with like these movements and
Yeah.
and the desire to give back to the community, to educate, and to uplift. And
Yeah.
so would love to hear how you resonated with the organization and what that experience was like for you to join as a non-black member.
Yeah. My first introduction into Alpha was at UTEP.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a very close friend of mine, and she was a Delta, and she introduced me to the Alphas that were in the community because they didn't have a chapter on the campus. And so we were looking at the time to hopefully charter, a chapter there of Alpha, but that didn't come to
Mm-hmm.
fruition.
Mm-hmm.
But another mentor of mine that he no longer works at UTEP, he works at the University of Miami, Dr. Ryan Holmes, also became a mentor of mine, and he was an Alpha.
Mm-hmm.
And so, talking to him about the organization, getting some more background um, about Alpha, really kind of helped me understand and realize that I wanted to be a part of this organization,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and not once throughout my process did I ever feel that any of the brothers or the big brothers, so to speak, that were bringing me in made me feel different than any of my other brothers who are online, for example, because I'm not black,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's interesting, right? Because I went through the graduate chapter. I went through our graduate chapter, and so I actually didn't start that research about the Black Panther Party and the Brown Berets until
Oh, after. Oh,
after I already
wow.
came into Alpha, and so
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting, kind of understanding, those dynamics again. That our struggles have been historically interrelated, on a
Mm-hmm.
multitude of levels. Um, and just seeing what the organization, stood for and stands for,
Mm-hmm.
even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from historical figures in our fraternity, but continuing that work
Yeah.
right into today and into the future. And so yeah, looking back, it was really Dr. Holmes who got me thinking about Alpha, actually got me in contact with the Alphas here from the graduate chapter that I ended up joining. um, so yeah, very interesting, but again, understanding that our communities are connected, right, on
Yeah.
a multitude of levels. And so um, that was kind of my introduction into Alpha. Yeah, now thinking it's been 9 years.
9 years, huh? Yeah, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's been 8 for me. So
Mm-hmm.
it goes by fast. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think something I've always appreciated about you, Frat, for those who may be also fraternity brothers of ours who are watching but don't know us, you have been like so involved, so committed to your grad chapter from the moment that I met you till I can remember, whether that's through Alpha Academy, whether that's through the different positions that you've taken, whether that's the way you promote the different events. I don't know how you would refer to it, but I just feel like you have made sure that no one's ever been able to like question, right? Like your commitment or
Yeah.
your desire or whether you earned or are worthy of being a part of a historically black fraternity. And, the reason why I asked what your experience was like is because I had shared with my LB Nimi, or maybe I didn't share this, and maybe this was just something that I've come across. And I know I've talked about it with other brothers like my little bro, Corey Copeland, who I also had on the podcast. But there are certain regions that do feel some type of way of non-black members being a part of Alpha Phi Fraternity
Yeah.
Incorporated. And I actually understand, like I get it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at the same time, like I'm still very honored and privileged to have been able to be given an opportunity. And I think for me, I'm just like, how do I make sure that I display that I joined for the right reason, and that I really do want to be a good representation of what Alpha is and will be and has been, in its entirety as an organization. And so, any light that you could shed on just kind of what that's been like for you in regards to like your involvement and what has lit the fire for you to be so involved?
Yeah, I think just for the youth,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, um, thinking back when I first joined the organization, and I remember brothers telling me when I was going through the process that the real work starts after you
After you
cross.
cross. Yeah.
And now, 9 years later, I understand that
Yeah.
even more. And yeah, I just think, if you're going to be a part of an organization, that you have to be committed, right, to it, to its mission, vision, values, etc. Whatever those may be, right, and continue to hold the name high, as we say, right. And that kind of like really sparked me into um, creating this idea, which came to fruition, of our Alpha Academy program, right. And so our Alpha Academy program really is underneath the umbrella of our Go to High School, Go to College national program through our fraternity. And I realized that young men specifically, we looked at we had this program for grades 6 through 12. So it was a large age range there, but we realized that they needed these critical aspects to understand. Like, not only is it significant to graduate high school, but then also to pursue in higher education as well. Um, and so, yeah, I started that back in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. Actually, we were set to actually begin in person, and we had to go to an online format.
Yep.
But it's been, very impactful. Working with students in and around Solano County, the larger Bay Area, and then we also had students who had worked with us from Georgia and even Missouri, as well, that were able to come together in those online spaces. We only met once a month, and we, focused on different workshops, during those times that we met. You've been a guest on Alpha Academy before. We've had other fraternity brothers, and then also outside community members come and speak, to the young men during those workshops. Um, and so I think that, really pushed me, to be committed to that vision, right? um, because, again, the youth are the future, right? And so if we're not guiding them, what is our world going to look like? And so I just think from that standpoint, again, regardless as to if brothers or even community members question the fact that I'm not Black and I'm in this historically Black fraternity, despite the fact that Alpha was the first fraternity to be integrated, right, in 1945, before the country decided in 1954 that we should desegregate, right? And so, um, you know, I think despite that there might be slights that members might have to me, I think that my work has shown I'm upholding the name of Alpha. And so that's what we came in to do, and that's what I'll continue to do. So that's kind of my tidbit on that.
Yeah. And I think the reason why I wanted to make sure we acknowledged it is because, right, for anybody that's watching out there, here we have the letters.
Right.
I have my sash, got my hat,
Mhm.
and we're both a part of this organization, and neither of us are Black, right? And
Mhm.
to be able to just have such an open dialogue around that, I think not only to give insight as to what drove us to this organization, how we've displayed our commitment, and I agree wholeheartedly, like your work speaks for itself. And if there is, because I've gotten reached out to a non-Black interested member, like just understanding what it means to be wanting to join, and then once you're in it, like making sure that you're in it for the right reasons, and that you'll be contributing to the work, because that is one thing that, right, I don't share openly, but I've had a bunch of DMs from folks of the Latino community, white community, who have reached out to me like, hey, I'm interested in Alpha, like you shared your story on your TikTok, because I made a TikTok a few years ago that to this day will randomly get a like. And I think it's because I use the hashtag Alpha, and there must be young people out there who just type that, come across it, and then are interested, right? But every time I interact with them, I always tell them, do your research, learn the history, make sure you're joining for the right reasons. Because if you just want to go to parties, you don't need a fraternity to go to parties. If you just like the colors black and gold, buy yourself a New Orleans Saints jersey. That's black and gold too. Like, you need to have a direct and personal connection to the organization. And I think your life story, what you've decided to study, the different mentors that you have had the chance to meet and build in your life, like it all makes sense to me, right? Like, I think when you told your story so organically to me off camera during the many interactions that we had, I was like, oh yeah, Max was meant to be an Alpha. Like, in the same way that I genuinely believe I was meant to be an Alpha. And I just love that, whether it be directly through our chapters or even just with the way we navigate this world. Like, I think I don't think, I know we're really great representations of the
Yeah,
organization, and I thank
definitely.
you for being a great
Yeah.
representation of it. Because when I'm out there trying to like recruit or kind of talk about the organization, you always come up.
Yeah.
Even though you don't know, like I always bring up, there's this dope brother named Max. I don't even tell them what background you're. You're
Right.
just a dope brother, because
Yeah.
that's how I try and just get young people to at least explore the
Hmm.
possibility of these
Yeah.
organizations. And so, yeah, I thank you for that, Frat.
And I have time for more questions too, if you have
Okay,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I got some kind of what I'll call rapid fire to close out, but I
Hmm.
still give you, the recommendation of elaborating as much as you'd
Yeah.
want with these questions. And so, this is how we'll close out this episode. But this amazing man will be back because there's still so much for us to talk about. But here are these 5 rapid fire
Yeah.
questions. But again, the rapid fire, me asking them, but you can take as long as you want with how
Okay.
you
Yeah.
answer
Yeah.
them. So the first one is, to Max Trujillo, success means.
Ooh. Yeah. To me, what does success mean? I think that you're happy.
Hmm.
I don't think success, although others might, argue that it's built off of the degrees that you have, the career that you're in, etc., the awards that you've won, scholarships. But I think right now, and again, I'm not old, but having some more life experience, I think success is being happy,
Mm-hmm.
and whatever that may be, right? It could be related to the relationship that you have with your spouse, your family relationships, the work that you do, right, in and outside of the classroom, for example. But if I'm just answering it in a sentence, I'd say is that you're happy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Money will come and go.
Mm-hmm.
That's great if you think that being successful is the amount of money that you owe, but I don't think at this point in my time, and I don't think that I've ever really looked at it that way, that money will, you know, determine my own success.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Fry. Question number 2. You wake up and get out of bed every day
Hmm.
inspired by.
My students.
Mm,
Yeah, my students. I think, being a tenure track faculty member and having worked with students from all age ranges, right, from the Boys and Girls Club.
mm-hmm.
Even my first teaching experience was when I was teaching Kajikempo karate, right? And I was only about like 15 years old starting that. I mean, I argue I've been teaching for 15 plus years, right? And people look at me and think, well, Max, you're really young. How can that be, right? But going back further than just inside the classroom, being a teacher, it's my students that motivate me, right? And especially now in our present day, in our political climate, I think that the work that my students are doing inside these spaces is transcending outside of these classrooms, right? Regardless of my students' majors, right? If I'm just going to take a random poll, there's hardly anyone in any of my classes that's actually an ethnic studies major
Mm-hmm.
at the community college level. We have STEM majors, we have nursing students, right? Um, and so, you know, I think having them thinking critically about whatever concepts that we're talking about in our class, but also understanding how like these issues, as I always tell my students historically that may be an issue, are actually still happening today in our
Mm-hmm.
present day of 2025. And so organizations like the Black Panther Party, the Brown Berets, the Young Lords, etc., right, that we're fighting for these changes, communities are still fighting, unfortunately, for these changes in our present day. And so having students understand that and seeing them grow and grasp that is what keeps me going, all right, is my students.
Yeah.
I know that might be a typical answer for an educator, but it is
Mm-hmm.
my students in all of my courses that I teach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Question number 3. Ethnic studies needs to stay on our education system because.
It helps community members think critically about these issues, right? I think from a K through 12 level, we've become so prone to not questioning what we're being taught,
Mm-hmm.
for example, right? And there's a direct attack on marginalized communities that are
Mm-hmm.
highlighted within ethnic studies, from the Black community, the American Indian, Native American, Indigenous community, Asian American Pacific Islander community, or the Chicano or Latinx or Chicanx community that are historically within the field of ethnic studies. And I think those attacks on those communities and their stories, not just the oppressions that they have faced and continue to face, but also the triumphs and the joy that these communities contribute, need to be taught in all spaces, right? Because a lot of times I have students in my classes, whether they be a student of color or not, right? Understanding again, wow, like I was never taught this in, you know, middle school or high school, and understanding like I didn't know that this happened 30 miles away from me, right, at SF State or at Berkeley, right? And so it needs to be continue to be taught. And I'm thankful and glad that the state of California, you know, has made it a requirement at the high school level. So now I think the incoming class of 2026, they have to take an ethnic studies
Mm-hmm.
class at the high school level to graduate,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now at the community college level, to transfer to a CSU or UC, you need to take an ethnic studies class. And as I tell all my students, regardless of your major, um, you're going to learn something, right, in these classes. And I think being able to take what we're learning into your own major, into your own career field, professionally and personally, right, is going to help you grow in ways that you wouldn't even have imagined,
Mm-hmm.
right? You might be in a chemical engineering major or a structural engineering major and realize like, well, what does ethnic studies have to do with me? I'm a STEM major,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But then realizing, well, the ways that we go about, you know, building various structures, or we're going to build this new housing development, but you haven't taken into consideration the local community that's there, that has been there historically,
Mm-hmm.
right? That
Mm-hmm.
may pause you in your, you know, professional field years from now. And I think that's the significance of ethnic studies, right? Is just being able to think critically,
Yeah.
right? To ask these questions, and to spark these imaginations within our students, in knowing that our world, as I tell my students, doesn't have to be the way that it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? I know, I love to stay optimistic, but I know that our world doesn't have to continue to operate the way that it is. And so our students are going to be that change, right?
Mm-hmm.
To bring about change in all these various spaces that they make up. And so, yeah, I think it's great that the high school levels are teaching it. We teach at the community college levels. Of course, it's taught at both the higher ed, at the four-year institutions as well, right? But having every student, regardless of their major, take these classes is, I've just seen students grow. Some who have come into the classes that, yeah, don't want to be there straight up, but to see them progress and to grow at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the semester is something that, you know, is truly inspirational. And ethnic studies is needed now more than ever,
Yeah.
right? Our communities are being attacked on multiple levels, both physically and non-physically, right? And as I tell my students, regardless if you're a member of these communities or not, I know we don't need to live the way that we live, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
um, I know that was a more of a long-winded
No, it's
answer, but
fine.
yeah, ethnic studies is needed now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that, Fred. Two more questions before we close out. Your family means to you.
Oh, the world, yeah. Wouldn't and not to get emotional, right? But
Please feel free.
wouldn't be here, you know,
Mm-hmm.
without any of them. My mother, my sister, my wife,
Mm-hmm.
my niece, my nephew, and all my family members, right, who are here, no longer here.
Mm-hmm.
There's this term. It's a Mayan term that I was talking with my students about, and I know I'm mispronouncing it wrong because it's an indigenous term, but it's KXU, and it basically stands for like when we leave this earth, our spirit lives on in our family members, right? And so I think about that, right, from time to time, because I know that my ancestors, you know, on both sides of my family, like fought for me to be sitting here
Mm-hmm.
today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they speak through me, and I'm, you know, along with my niece and nephew and my sister, I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, from, all of my family members, even my father, who's no longer here, right? I know that, they're proud, and I uphold, my family with my last name, and just in the work that I do, in and um, outside of the classroom, for sure.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
appreciate you for tapping into your heart as you answered that question. I think it hopefully leads us into this last question,
yeah.
which is uh, Max Trujillo came to the Heart and Hustle podcast because.
This work that I do is, important, right? And it extends beyond just the classrooms that I teach in, right? I'm an ethnic studies educator, but also the impact that mentorship has had on me,
Hmm.
right? I wouldn't be here without, my mentors from karate, from undergraduate, from graduate school, and my family, who have, continued to support me. But that mentorship is crucially needed in all of our communities, not only for, our young men of color, but also our women of
Yeah.
color
Hmm.
and all community
Hmm.
members, right? To seek out that mentorship, whether it be, a professor at your community college or the institution that you attend, um, and or maybe even a supervisor that you have at the job or the career that you're working in, or an internship, right? Mentorship is key to me, and I, wouldn't be here again without my mentors who continue to guide me as I navigate these spaces, growing as a professional, in higher ed, which is an institution in of itself, which is a headache sometimes to navigate.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, yeah, that's what really brought me here. Your vision, which I know we've shared, offline as well, not on camera, about the continued impact that you've had on students and continue and will continue to have, is something that inspires me, and hopefully that I leave to, my students as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can assure you, Frat, that you are making such an impact just through your existence, just through the way that you honor your ancestors,
Yeah.
your lineage. Something that I know we talked about last time, and I would love to dive into this in our next episode together. Was that of you doing even more self exploration in
Hmm.
regards to like your origins, your
Yeah.
roots? Because I'm a big believer that when you know to the fullest extent where you come from, like it definitely gives you so much clarity and fire as to where you want to be and where you
Right.
want to go. And so, no, I thank you for joining me. I thank those
Hmm.
of you that watched. I told y'all that I had an amazing guest joining me today, as they all have been. And yet, in this moment in time, I feel inspired. I feel connected to you, Frat, in ways that I haven't had the chance to feel connected before, right? And
Yeah.
I think ultimately, um, I will say, as much as I create this content, hoping that someone out there can enjoy, can learn, can be inspired by, I think I've also come to just have to acknowledge that selfishly. I also just love connecting with the people that I love and care
Yeah.
about in ways where we talk about things that might not naturally come up. And so
Right.
I thank you for riding this wave with me of the different curiosities, questions that I posed. And I'm excited for the next one that we get a chance to
Yeah.
film.
For sure.
But
Same here. Yeah.
I,
No, thank you for having me.
I thank you
Yeah.
again. And so, with that, thank you again for joining us here with another episode of the Heart and Hustle podcast. Y'all enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend, everybody. See ya.